My name is Lucas Miller. I am 31 years old, and this is the story of how my own parents chose my sister over me and unknowingly created the biggest mistake of their lives. Because for as long as I can remember, I was always the quiet, responsible child, the one who never complained, never demanded attention, and never caused problems, while my younger sister Sophia was the golden child, the one whose dreams were always protected, whose mistakes were always forgiven, and whose failures were always blamed on someone else. Growing up in our small Ohio suburb, I learned early that love in my family was conditional, and it depended on how useful you were to my parents' image of a perfect family. When I turned 22 and graduated from college, my father sat me down in the living room and told me that one day this house would be mine, that it was my reward for being loyal and hardworking, and I believed him with all my heart. Because at that time I still trusted my parents completely, so I stayed. I paid half of every mortgage installment, covered most repair costs, renovated the kitchen with my own savings, fixed broken plumbing, replaced the roof, landscaped the backyard, and even painted every wall myself after coming home exhausted from my job, while Sophia traveled, partied, changed majors 3 times, and always returned home to comfort and praise. And whenever I tried to speak up, my mother would smile and say, "Lucas, you're strong, you can handle it," as if strength meant being used without complaint. And slowly I realized that I was not being supported. I was being depended on, financially and emotionally, without ever being valued. Yet I stayed silent because I believed in family, because I believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. But what my parents didn't know was that while I was working 2 jobs during the day and studying real estate and finance at night, I was quietly learning how money really worked, how properties increased in value, how rental income built wealth, and how patience created power. And I never told anyone about my plans, not even Sophia, because in my family, dreams were only celebrated when they belonged to her. And by the time I was 28, I had already bought my first rental duplex under a small LLC I created in secret. Then another, then another. Slowly building a hidden empire while everyone still thought I was just helping at home. And then one Sunday afternoon, sitting at the same dining table where I had grown up, my father casually announced that they had decided to give the house to Sophia because she needed security and I was independent enough. And in that moment, years of sacrifice collapsed inside my chest, because I finally understood that all my loyalty, money, and effort meant nothing to them. And as I stared at the walls I had painted, the floors I had repaired, and the home I had rebuilt, I realized that I had never truly owned anything in their eyes. But instead of screaming, crying, or begging, I simply nodded, smiled politely, and decided that day that I would never allow myself to be invisible again. After that dinner, life inside the house changed in a way that was quiet but deeply humiliating, because even though nothing was said out loud, everything had shifted. Sophia began acting like the house already belonged to her, moving furniture without asking, talking about my room and my future renovations, while my parents encouraged it with proud smiles, and I was slowly erased from the picture of the family I had helped sustain. My mother started reminding me that I should think about moving out soon. Even though it was my money that kept the lights on and the roof intact, and every time I handed over my share of the mortgage or utilities, I felt like a guest paying rent in a home I had rebuilt with my own hands. Yet I stayed calm, not because I was weak, but because I was planning, because late at night, after everyone slept, I would sit in my car outside, making calls to property managers, reviewing contracts, approving repairs, and transferring funds between accounts that my family knew nothing about. And the irony was painful, because while they believed I was dependent on them, I had already reached a point where my passive income exceeded my salary. But I never corrected their assumptions, never defended myself, because I had learned that silence can be more powerful than arguments. And then one evening, Sophia announced she wanted to remodel the kitchen entirely, tearing out cabinets I had installed. And my father agreed without hesitation, using the words that finally broke something inside me when he said, "It's her house now, Lucas. You should understand." And I did understand, not in the way he meant, but in the sense that I finally accepted that I would never be chosen in this family, that love here was transactional, and that my role had always been to give without receiving. So that night I packed a single suitcase, not in anger but with clarity, leaving behind furniture I paid for, walls I painted, and memories that were no longer safe. And as I drove away, instead of feeling loss, I felt relief, because for the first time, I was no longer carrying the weight of proving my worth to people who had already decided it. And what they still didn't know was that the small, temporary apartment I moved into was directly across the street from one of the properties I secretly owned, part of a larger plan I had been building quietly for years, a plan that did not include revenge, but justice, balance, and a truth that would soon become impossible for them to ignore. Living on my own for the first time in years felt strangely peaceful, even though my apartment was small and sparsely furnished, because every corner of it belonged to me. Every bill I paid was for my own future, and every decision I made no longer needed approval from people who never truly valued me. Yet I still watched my family from a distance, not out of obsession, but out of habit, because when you spend your life trying to earn love, it doesn't disappear overnight. And from across the street, I could see Sophia hosting friends, parking expensive cars in the driveway, talking loudly on the phone about her property, while my parents walked around proudly as if they had secured their daughter's destiny. And soon, their confidence grew into arrogance. My mother stopped calling me altogether. My father only contacted me when he needed advice about repairs or taxes, still assuming I was just good with numbers, unaware that I was managing millions quietly. And then one afternoon, while reviewing my portfolio with my financial advisor, I noticed something that made me pause, because several properties in our neighborhood, including the ones surrounding my parents' house, were up for sale at undervalued prices due to an upcoming commercial development project that most locals didn't yet know about. And instantly, years of preparation aligned in my mind like pieces of a puzzle. I saw opportunity where others saw inconvenience. So within weeks, using my LLC network and investment partners, I began purchasing houses one by one, never in my own name, never in a way that raised suspicion, slowly acquiring the entire block like a chess player moving pieces silently, while Sophia bragged about planning pool parties and garden renovations, completely unaware that every property around her was now controlled by the brother she had dismissed as too boring to succeed. And what hurt the most was not her ignorance, but how easily my parents accepted the illusion that she was the successful one, and I was the failure, even when neighbors congratulated them for raising such an ambitious daughter. They never once corrected the story, never once mentioned my sacrifices, and yet, I did not feel bitterness anymore, only clarity. Because success without recognition is still success, and power without noise is still power. And as the final contract was signed one quiet Friday morning, giving me legal control over every property on that street except their own house, I realized that destiny had not favored me by accident. It had rewarded patience, and soon, circumstances would force my family to see me not as the invisible helper, but as the man who owned the ground beneath their feet. The moment everything changed came on a quiet Tuesday morning, when large construction vehicles began parking at both ends of the street. Surveyors started placing bright orange markers on sidewalks, and official notices were slipped into every mailbox announcing the upcoming redevelopment project that would transform our quiet suburb into a commercial and residential hub. And while most neighbors reacted with confusion and worry, I watched calmly from my balcony, knowing exactly what was coming, because I had been part of the early negotiations, had secured long-term leases with developers, and had positioned myself as the primary landholder through my investment group. Yet my parents panicked almost immediately, calling emergency family meetings, worrying about noise, traffic, and property taxes, while Sophia complained endlessly about how construction would ruin her lifestyle. And then the real shock arrived when certified letters informed them that all surrounding properties were now owned by a private investment company that intended to restructure the neighborhood, requiring access rights, zoning changes, and temporary relocation during major renovations. And suddenly, for the first time in their lives, they were powerless, unable to influence decisions with charm or emotional pressure. And when they tried contacting the company, they were told politely that all negotiations would be handled through the managing partner, whose name they had never bothered to learn. And the day of the meeting, I walked into the conference room wearing a tailored suit, carrying a leather folder, and watching disbelief spread across their faces as I took my seat at the head of the table, introducing myself calmly as Lucas Miller, managing director of Miller Urban Holdings. And in that moment, years of silence finally spoke louder than any argument ever could. My mother's hands trembled, my father's voice cracked, and Sophia stared at me as if she were seeing a stranger. Because in a way, she was finally seeing the man I had become without their permission, without their approval, without their help. And as I explained redevelopment plans, compensation options, and long-term value projections, I did so without anger or pride, only professionalism, because revenge would have been easy, cruelty would have been tempting, but dignity was more powerful. And when my father finally whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" I answered honestly, "You never asked." And in that simple sentence lived every ignored sacrifice, every unpaid effort, every dismissed dream. And yet, despite everything, I offered them fair terms, relocation support, and ownership participation if they wished, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become bitter like the system that had overlooked me. And as the meeting ended and they walked out in stunned silence, I realized that success had not changed who I was. It had only revealed who everyone else had been all along.